This is the news in brief from the United Nations. As UN-led global food security discussions began on Wednesday in Rome, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that war in Ukraine had already inflamed a crisis of food, energy and finance that has affected the world's most vulnerable people. Speaking alongside Austria's President Alexander Van der Bellen in Vienna, the UN chief said that global food security had been the focus of his recent meetings in Moscow and Kiev after Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February. We need quick and decisive action to ensure a steady flow of food and energy in open markets, he said, recommending the lifting of export restrictions, allocating surpluses and reserves to those in need, and addressing food price increases. Despite the war, Mr. Guterres insisted that a meaningful solution to global food insecurity requires reintegrating into world markets Ukraine's harvests and Russia's and Belarus's food production. Meanwhile, the Food and Agriculture Organization FAO brought together European and Central Asian countries to find solutions to the war's impact on global agri-food systems. It has also launched a rapid response plan to provide life and livelihood saving support to farmers who cannot meet their basic food needs. Staying with Ukraine, almost 5 million jobs have been lost in the country over the last 2.5 months, the UN labour agency ILO said. New ILO data shows that the war has led to a 30% drop in employment, and the agency predicts that if conflict continues, 7 million people could be out of work in Ukraine. Here's Heinz Scholler, ILO's regional director for Europe and Central Asia, speaking in Geneva.
According to estimates from the Ukrainian Employers Organization, up to 50% of the enterprises are either out of operation or really seriously limited in their operation. And finally, there's obviously the massive global impact through various channels, in particular the rising energy and food prices, which will have a negative impact on employment, in particular in the low and middle developed countries.
ILO also anticipates that neighbouring countries hosting Ukraine's 6 million refugees could also struggle because of additional pressures on their labour markets and welfare systems, and any economic deterioration within Russia would likely force migrant workers to return home, significantly affecting remittances. The UN and Netherlands have co-chaired a pledging event in The Hague to prevent an environmental disaster by rescuing rusting oil supertanker FSO Safer off the coast of Yemen. The vessel, moored off the key western port of Hodeidah, holds 4 times the amount of oil that caused the 1989 Exxon Valdez spill in Alaska. After more than 7 years of war, the UN warned that such a spill would cause lasting environmental damage with profound economic costs across the region and disrupt shipping through the Bab al-Mandab Strait and the Suez Canal, resulting in daily trade losses of billions of dollars. As an oil spill cleanup is estimated at $20 billion, the pledging conference aims to secure funding for a rescue plan that would save tens of billions of dollars in the future, said a UN statement. Daniel Johnson, UN News. This is the news in brief from the United Nations. The UN Human Rights Council met in special session on Thursday in Geneva, prompted by increasing concern over atrocities committed against civilians following Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. A mounting number of reports and testimonies point to possible war crimes in Ukraine, particularly in areas controlled until recently by Russian forces, said UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet.
These killings of civilians often appear to be intentional, carried out by snipers and soldiers. Civilians were killed when crossing the road or leaving their shelters to seek food and water.
Highlighting the latest harrowing findings of UN investigators in the Kiev and Chernihiv regions, Ms. Bachelet told the forum that 1,000 civilian bodies had been found in the Kiev region alone. Some had been killed in hostilities, but others appeared to have been summarily executed. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has added his voice to international condemnation of the killing of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian-American reporter for Al Jazeera TV was shot dead on Wednesday while covering an operation by Israeli security forces in Jenin. She was a veteran reporter and wearing a protective vest that clearly identified her as a journalist. In a statement, Mr. Guterres said that he was appalled by the killing before calling for an independent investigation into the incident so that those responsible can be held accountable. There is uncertainty about who fired the fatal shot that killed Ms. Akleh. Journalists at the scene reportedly disputed an Israeli account that Palestinian fighters may have been responsible. To North Korea, also known as DPRK, where the UN Health Agency has said that it is committed to help the country respond to COVID-19 after its first declared infection was reported in the media on Thursday. Responding to UN News, the World Health Organization, WHO, said that it was in touch with the authorities but has yet to receive an official report from the country's health ministry after reports that the highly contagious Omicron variant has been identified. Dr. Edwin Salvador, WHO representative to DPR Korea, said that the UN agency had supported the country in developing its national preparedness and response plan for COVID-19. With partners including UN Children's Fund UNICEF and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, WHO also supported DPR Korea's COVID-19 vaccine deployment plan. The country is eligible to receive COVID-19 vaccines through the UN-partnered COVAX scheme. Daniel Johnson, UN News. This is the news in brief from the United Nations. In Ukraine, nearly 80 days into the Russian invasion, UN humanitarians and partners have warned that TB and HIV patients are at particular risk from having their life-saving treatment regimes interrupted. According to UNAIDS, an estimated 260,000 people live with HIV in Ukraine, the second highest proportion in Eastern Europe and Central Asia after Russia. Of that number, more than 150,000 are on antiretroviral therapy, medication that people with HIV need to take every day to stay alive and well. Although there are sufficient stocks of medicine in the country, the fact that some 8 million people are now displaced inside Ukraine has prompted concerns that those in need of HIV and TB drugs may not be able to get them. Here's Andriy Klepikov from the NGO Global Fund speaking in Geneva.
Logistics is very complicated. Some of the roads are destroyed and people are mobile, and some of them hiding in quite remote locations from the war. So that's why we are helping them to deliver medicines and to maintain contacts by phone, by social media, because it's also an important part. So not only provide pills, but also keep motivation of people to take medicines.
Echoing that message, UNITAID spokesperson Hervé Verheussel told UN News that the agency's TB projects in Ukraine had been affected by the war, but that every effort must be made to ensure that all patients with TB or HIV receive their medicines on time. A top UN-appointed independent rights expert on terrorism is to make an official visit to the Maldives, where efforts are underway to reintegrate nationals who fought in conflicts abroad. Fionnuala Ny Alwen, who's spending 9 days in the Maldives from the 15th to the 24th of May, will visit detention centres, where she'll interview people suspected or convicted of terrorism-related activities and extremist crimes. One of the aims of Ms Ny Alwen's visit is to identify good practices in the return, rehabilitation and reintegration of foreign fighters and women and children with alleged links to designated terrorist groups in places like Syria, her office said in a statement on Friday. The issue has been a long-standing concern of UN-appointed independent rights experts who've joined repeated appeals to dozens of countries to take back all of their nationals still held in detention in Syria's infamous Al-Hol camp complex. Located in northeast Syria, Al-Hol is home to some 65,000 people and an estimated 10,000 foreign nationals who've endured terrible conditions. They include the former wives, children and relatives of ISIL fighters. Ms Ny Alwen, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism, also plans to meet government representatives in the Maldives along with law enforcement officials and policy specialists. She will present a comprehensive report with her findings and recommendations to the UN Human Rights Council in March next year. Special rapporteurs and independent experts like Ms Ny Alwen received their mandates from the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. They operate in their individual capacity and are neither UN staff nor are they paid for their work. A new UN-led push to prevent an arms race in outer space has received wide-ranging support and participation from member states and civil society at talks in Geneva. The first open-ended working group on reducing space threats that's been meeting all week in the Swiss city is the result of a UN General Assembly resolution last December seeking to promote norms, rules and principles of responsible behaviours among countries present in the cosmos or which are planning to be present in orbit. An international treaty for outer space already exists that forms the basis of international space law, but it is 55 years old and needs updating urgently to take account of new space-based threats to global security and the fact that all nations rely on space today for navigation, communication, broadband and finance, explained Helmut Lagos, chair of the working group talks.
That treaty is actually the cornerstone of the international space regime. That is still true. But at the same time, we need to see what other norms, principles, and rules can be negotiated to fill the legal gaps that are there, considering how the space environment has evolved in the last couple of decades dramatically.
Helmut Lagos ending that item. Daniel Johnson, UN News.